upfront introduction. So welcome to HubStor's webinar on message journaling. I know that especially in 2020, everybody's busy. I know you've got a lot more things to do with your time than just listen to me. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time for this. Originally, when we talked about doing this presentation, I came up with a much more complicated title about how journaling yesterday's messages today would save you in the future, and thus we have the Back to the Future car. The wiser people than me were able to get me to see that a less complicated title was probably actually a better thing. So before we start, let me just give you a little idea of who I am. My name is Dave Henry. I am product marketing manager for HubStor. I have been earning a living full-time in IT since January of 1987. Yes, that was back when we used abacuses and archive meant storing things on clay tablets. Over those years, I've been in many different data centers. I've worked with multiple cloud platforms, and I have joined HubStor and the marketing team via the technical route. So far that seems to be working. Okay, so what we're here to talk about is message journaling. So the first question everybody has, of course, is, well, what is that? Sometimes you might hear it referred to as message capture. The idea is that what you're using for messaging, you are able to transparently keep a copy of everything that comes through your company email, your company messaging systems, because sometimes that information is going to be really important. And I'll give some examples a little bit later in the presentation of when some of those things might be. So back in the day, people used to think message journaling or messaging, they just had to worry about email. When I started my career, if I had lost a disk on an email server and I couldn't recover it, I would have to go to my boss and tell them that, and they'd say, well, what did we lose? And I said, well, it was email. They'd say, oh, never mind. People just resend stuff. And, you know, that worked maybe in the late 80s and early 90s, but since that time, email usage has been adopted by pretty much everybody on Earth, and businesses have completely changed the way they're using it. It is now an essential business tool. People are sending purchase orders or invoices via email. They're sending copies of signed contracts by email. So if you're not able to keep your email up and running 24/7, or if some disaster happens and you're unable to restore or recover your email, that is what we in the industry refer to as a RGE, a resume generating event. So with that, you know, today messaging and collaboration apps have become a complete necessity. Businesses with multiple locations around the globe need them for collaboration. People are working remotely, and more employees are working from home lately. So other organizations are becoming more and more reliant on these apps. So today, in addition to email, you need to journal whatever messaging apps you're using as well, whether it's Slack, Microsoft Teams, Instant Messenger, Facebook Messenger, Skype, whatever it is you're using. And it's not just enough to get the email and the messages, you also need to get any attachments that were sent by any of those systems. Now we also have PST files listed here on the screen. So I want to talk about them for a moment. If you're not familiar with them, PST stands for Personal Storage Tables. They've been around since the 1990s and they were originally intended to allow users to keep a local archive of their email messages, calendar appointments, etc. If your organization has been using Outlook for even as long as the last 6 months, there are 4 things that I can tell you are most likely going on in your environment, and here's what you need to know about PST files. 1, you have them. Some email user somewhere has saved something into a PST. Chances are you don't know how many of them you have out there. Number 3, you certainly don't know where they all are. And number 4 is the biggest concerning, especially when you start talking about regulatory compliance. You don't know what's in those PSTs. Maybe it's personal identifying information about your customers, about your employees. Maybe it's sensitive data about one of your trade secrets that you don't want leaking out. So you really want to make sure you can get control of that. So any journaling system you're going to use needs to be able to import those PSTs and bring them in and ensure that they're completely secure. So these are some of the things that you need in a reliable journaling solution. So first, you need it to be real time. You want that data capture to be running continuously. Email comes in 24/7. People working with other people in different time zones are up late sending messages during that time. You want to make sure each and every message gets captured into the journal. Now, you want to make sure that all the context taken in is indexed, because nobody just journals their messages because it's a fun thing to do. We weren't looking for something to do on a Saturday afternoon, and so we just said, hey, let's journal our messages. No, the reason you journal things is so that you can go back into them later, either to use it to do a recovery if somebody lost their mailbox, or in case there's anything you need to prove in a legal case or important information you need to pull out. Hey, we solved that 3 years ago, I remember. Let's find it, figure out what we did then. You want to be able to search it, and you want that search to be very, very fast. If you end up in a legal situation, there's a phase of the legal proceedings referred to as discovery. That's when each side gets to time to research and gets to ask the other side for relevant information. And if you have a fast search, you can actually run in there and get all the relevant data, export it, and send the other side's lawyers a file with everything that's relevant, maybe about 15 minutes after you started looking for it. Great, you're paying for a quarter hour of a lawyer's time for that. If you can't do that journaling, if you can't provide that, you're going to have lawyers have to come in and spend time going through your email themselves. And they'll send a staff with a couple paralegals, and you'll be charged the hourly rate for each of them. The other thing about that is if you just give them everything instead of just the relevant messages, you might then be revealing, personal information about people who have nothing to do with the legal case. You might be revealing trade secrets that also aren't associated with the case. So you definitely want something where you can send what's needed, everything that's needed, but nothing but the things that are needed. And that's where that indexing and search capabilities come in. So, to put that more visually, you want that message capture and the indexing to be happening continuously, but it should be transparent. You don't want it to have any impact whatsoever on your users and their user experience. And in many cases, a really good journaling solution like ours, you can actually set up and allow individual end users to run their own searches on their email that you have journaled. So if I know that somebody sent me a message, 9 months ago that I've since deleted, but I need that, that account number or that important piece of information that was in there, but it's not in my inbox anymore. My administrator kind of set me up so that I have permissions to run the search on my own environment. I can log into my account on the journaling system, and I can do some detailed searches on exactly what I'm looking for. What I'll be doing during the demo is I'll show you some more examples of the complexity and the power of the search. So why do you need message journaling? In the past, this was just really a nice to have, but these days with all the compliance regulations, these days with all the concern about people's personal information, data theft, identity theft, and with protecting yourselves, it's really become a necessity. So the main reason that organizations are using message journaling is for regulatory compliance. So I like to say there are three things about compliance that everybody who starts to try and solve the problem runs into. The first is that it's actually fairly easy to make the policies that would comply with the regulations. It's more difficult to actually implement and enforce those policies. And thirdly, it's even more difficult than that to be able to prove that that policy has been enforced and enforced continuously. And that's where your message journaling comes in. I'll just do a quick review of some of these regulations up on screen here. The SEC, they're the Security and Exchange Commission, and FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, both have very strict rules requiring the use of tamper-proof storage. Sometimes you might hear referred to as immutable storage or worm, the write once, read many times. FINRA is actually part of the SEC. FINRA works to regulate brokerage firms and stockbrokers, while the SEC is more looking to protect the investors. GCC is a general certificate of conformity. It's a statement that a company's products are compliant with all applicable public safety rules and regulations. So if a complaint came back from a customer or from a government organization, you want to have the ability to go back through all of your data, including email and messaging, so that you can help prove that, no, we did in fact comply with these regulations. Here shows you what we did. Food and Drug Administration enforces something called CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, because you don't have enough acronyms in your life. These regulations require long-term retention of data, especially data from clinical trials. They want you to save that data for a very long time. Sometimes they want that data to be kept forever because it will help inform future research. With these trials being so important these days, you can see how message journaling would be required. And lastly here, this GDPR. I'm sure you've probably all heard of it by now. It is the General Data Privacy Regulation. To describe it as simply as I can, GDPR requires that anyone doing business with or within the European Union must be able to provide people with a copy of data that's been collected on them. And if they request it, you must delete all of their data. And later in an audit, you may need to be able to prove that you responded in a timely fashion to that request and you actually did what you said you were going to do, which is delete that individual's information. So here, message journaling can help to show that you did in fact comply. Again, very important for any audit or if complaints come back. So message journaling is going to really help provide your organization with increased legal protection. So this could involve employee relations. You can show that that wasn't a wrongful termination after all. That employee had a history of poor performance and had been told about it multiple times. He'd been put on a performance plan and warned if they didn't accomplish these three things by the end of the month, their job was at risk. So it can help you prove for cause, and it just helps you keep track of everything that you have in fact notified employees of their benefits and any other things there that might come out of employer let me try that again. Anything that might come out of your relationship with your employees, you want to make sure that in the case that something does go bad or you get a bad apple in the group, you want to make sure that you have protected the organization still. Lawsuits. Regardless of the reason for the lawsuit, whether you are suing someone else or someone else is suing you, you really want to be able to provide that information for discovery. This may be the proof that you're using to make your case or the proof that you're using to show that their case is baseless. So the message journaling becomes very important there. And one thing that people don't think about when they think about message journaling is about protecting your intellectual property. You want to make sure that none of that IP gets lost. Maybe you had 3 or 4 developers who were essential in creating this fantastic brand new feature in your product, and 2 of them have left the company now. And they knew the system inside and out and had all the information. Well, you want to be able to get there, get what they worked on, get the email messages they sent to make sure you don't lose the how-tos or the why it was built this way. You also, in case you see another company doing something that looks suspiciously like some patented process you have, or they're trying to patent something that you believe is your process, the patent office refers to a thing called prior art. What prior art is you can show that you were working on it and developing it and did in fact develop it before they filed their claim. You're really the one who has the right to the patent. And this can be very helpful if you don't have your messages archived, if you aren't doing archiving of all your other data. It's going to be a lot harder to prove prior art. It's going to be a lot harder to prove your side in any conflict. So if you've got intellectual property, and intellectual property could really, it's not just processes or inventions, it's also your database of customers. Your information that on how your salespeople talk about the competitor. That's all that stuff that you guys need. It's very important, but you don't necessarily want it getting out. So with that, in order to get that legal protection, we have a thing called a legal hold that happens. When a legal hold is put on, what they're basically saying is you need to ensure that nothing related to the case can be deleted. So you want it to override any of the data retention rules to say, no, this data is going to be retained until its previous date or until the legal hold is lifted, whichever comes later. And again, when we talked about earlier, you wanting to be able to provide exactly what you need for the legal case, and you want to provide only that, you need a really flexible search that can cover things. Obviously for email, you want to get who was sending the email. You want to search on who received it. Now, if you just look at email by yourself, you don't see who is in the blind carbon copy. But if you're the administrator, you can set up the legal hold so those recipients who were included in the BCC still are searched. You can search on subjects, on keywords. You can use regular expressions with wildcards to search for things related to what you're looking for, and you can specify a date range. What was happening during that 3-month period, what was happening from the beginning of when that person was hired. What was the range when the customer complaint first came up to when you resolved it. Because you don't want to be, again, you don't want to be sending more data than you have to, but you do want to ensure that you get all of the relevant data and don't leave any of it behind. So let's take a look into some of the more detailed things that you can do with journaling or why people are using it. The biggest concern that a lot of people have, and it's a question that you should make sure you're asking if you're considering a solution for message journaling, you want to talk about scalability and ask questions about how it scales, is it scalable, will it scale not only to support you where you're at today, but it needs to support your data growth. Your organization may bring on more people, so there are more users' emails and messages that you need to have journaled and archived. With the data retention, even if I keep the same number of people, the amount of data is just going to grow, especially because, well, first, because that's just what data does. It has gravity and it collects more data to itself, so it just grows. But also, if I'm required to retain that information for 3 years, 7 years, 25 years, or some of the medical things now are for up till 25 years after the death of the patient, all of your data is going to grow because now you're adding more to it, but you haven't been able to delete other things. So is it scalable? Yes. Our backup archiving and message journaling solution is cloud-based. It's essentially backup as a service, and you can see here, Monster talking about it. They have been journaling over 8,000 email exchange mailboxes and having it be fully managed for them. And so, yes, we can scale with you as you grow. And another important point is that we work on a pay-as-you-go model for pricing. So you're only charged based on the data that you're storing in the archive. So if you start, if Monster started with 8 people and over time grew to 8,000, well, they were going to be paying for 8 people's worth of data early on. When they grew to 100, they were only be paying for that much. You don't have to get a solution that starts able to support 8,000 people from day one, unless you have 8,000 people when you start. Obviously, you'd need to do that. So you want to have some other things that are pretty important to a journaling solution. Self-service searches can be very important. A lot of journaling systems, the only way you can perform a search and export data from any of your archives or from your journals would require the work of the IT administrators. And, if you have, imagine again, 8,000 employees and, 6 different people each day delete their inbox or something, or need to request something that has since been archived off of their inbox, well, you're going to have at least one IT administrator who does nothing all day but respond to these. If you can give your end users the ability to perform those self-service searches so they can search only their own data, that can save your IT staff a lot of time and also lead to higher end user satisfaction. You can also do things like grant the legal staff at your organization rights to do the searches themselves. You'll have to give them a brief tutorial on it, but as you'll see in a few moments, it's really actually pretty easy and they should be able to pick it up pretty quickly. And you might give HR the ability to look into certain data about employees, but not other data. So again, that self-service search and the fact that you can use rules-based control to decide who is allowed to see what and search what can really be helpful in the long term. You want to have an ability to set a retention policy. Now, most often we see that set as a relative time period. Hey, I've got to keep this data for 7 years. Now, the retention policy means we need to ensure that data won't be deleted before 7 years after it was created. It doesn't mean we need to delete it immediately at 7 years, necessarily. There are some compliance that does things about people's old financial information, information about their accounts and stuff you may need to delete later just to help protect their privacy. But most often you don't want it to be deleted before then. We have the flexibility so that you can set a relative time period, like that 7 years, 3 years, 10 years, or an absolute date. Hey, anything related to this particular project, we want to make sure nobody's able to delete anything from it before June 8th, 2025. You can set that and have that retention applied. And again, we talked about the legal hold earlier. You want to make sure that you freeze everything that matches that specific search. You want to, in some cases, while the case is going on, it may override the retention period of some of that data. If I had something in there that was created six years and 11 months ago, and my retention period is 7 years, I want to ensure that as long as the legal case is active, that other stuff, even though it's past its original retention time, is still being retained. And you want to have an easy ability to copy or export anything that matches those searches so that you can give it to the lawyers or so that you can save it somewhere else so that you can ensure that it hasn't been tampered with and ensure you still have that data. So now we're at the part of things that is probably what many of you came for. I'm going to give you a live demo of the HubStor solution for message journaling, and you should see how easy things are. So first off, we have a browser-based management console. It makes it very easy for you to connect and manage from anywhere. So right now, HubStor has set up a special tenant for me so that I have my own individual environment to run demos in. Since we support full multi-tenancy in that sort of way, everybody has their own individual separate tenant. Nothing I can do to my environment has any chance of affecting anyone else but my own environment. So the only person I can mess things up for is me right now. So I've made life easier for me by bookmarking the URL to the service I'm running up in the cloud. And this is what you see here is this is the main thing you first see when you get into the things. You've got all things are laid out very easily and intuitively. If you didn't know how to do some particular task that you were looking to do, you could probably figure out where to find it pretty easily. And that was really the intent of this. So first, let's look at some things you might do for administering your cloud tenant. So that all comes under administration. You can see here as part of our dedication to ease of use, we actually give you some of the HubStor specific terminology and definitions we use. And it also gives you some basic instructions and what types of policies, etc. Now, if you're a visual person, you might prefer to look at the dashboard to get an overview of your environment. Now you can see here that I have only one site. I'm not actually, since my demos, I'm creating things just so I can destroy them later. Nobody thought it was necessary to replicate me to a second site, and I have to agree there. My site is in the eastern US, in that region, and you can see on the global map here where that is. If I hover over it, it'll give me some information. So I'm running 6 stores in this environment, and I have a very small amount of data there. Now, obviously, most of you will have a larger amount of data, but it can grow. The amount of data you have with us, we have multiple customers running dozens of terabytes, and we have a few customers who have actually, are storing beyond the petabyte range. So you can see here, we've got that. So if you had multiple locations, they'd also show up on the map. So one of the things here you want to look at is storage. So let's go look at the storage details. And so you can see here again, I've been only in one data center, but I've set things up for 6 different data sources that I'm going to back up or journal as appropriate from that data. So I've got BaaS, that's another cloud storage service. So if I'm using those, I can make sure I have a separate backup copy, so I'm not reliant on them. Email would be things from Exchange servers. I can certainly back up more than one Exchange server if I have to. I might keep them in multiple different regions so they're local to each other, local to where that Exchange server is. I can manage files. And more people are moving to SaaS applications these days. So we can actually back up pretty much everything in Microsoft 365. But since we're doing a message journal, let's look at email. Now you see here, for ease of use and ease of demo, to keep it simple, I've just called this data store email. If you were in fact running multiple Exchange servers, you'd create a separate store for each of them, and you'd want to use intuitive names like Boston Exchange Server or Toronto Exchange Server, just so you could ensure you're looking in the right place to find the data you want. Your stores are, I've got a little less than 5 gigabytes here. You're going to likely have a lot more data than that. But again, I'm only one person. So there's a number of options you have on that store. We can make sure it does versioning. We usually, every bit of data is encrypted while in transit, and we default to encrypting the data at rest. We use AES 256-bit encryption keys. You can do that with a private key that only you have the key to if you really want that data to be secure. The problem is that a lot of the search functions won't work on that data because they rely on being able to go in and read them. And if you lose that key, we can't help you because we never had a copy of it to begin with. So that's something used by only people who are really serious about keeping things super secure. I can set worm, that's that write once, read only, that immutable storage. I can set it to apply to the entire store where I'm storing the backed up data, or I can have it set so it's applied on each individual item. Okay, so I'm going to go through a quick look at a couple of the policies. You can do tiering. This lets you put your, it's asking me to relog in here. So tiering allows me to automatically move data. It lets me put the data I'm more likely to be accessing, like your latest backup sets or your most recent message journals. You want that where it's immediately retrievable, because that's the stuff you're most likely going to be looking for. You can also set, I can set a particular policy. Again, let's look at email. I can add a policy. I can decide whether or not I want it to run continuously, once, or just over a date range. I can run it in production, or I can run it in preview mode. Maybe I want to see what if I applied this tiering policy, how much data would move from the immediately available tier to the far less expensive archive tier. And so I can get an idea, predict what sort of cost savings I'd have, or just, keeping track of how much data. So I generally advise doing a preview of any policy before you turn it into a set into production one, just to make sure you've set everything correctly. All right. So one of the other things you can do, so that's tiering. You can also set policies on data retention. This is, again, for all that regulatory compliance. I can set those policies. Let's look at email again. And very similarly to what you saw in tiering, I can run it continuously. I can run it once over date range. I wouldn't choose never. That's very rare that you would do. Why would you create a policy for something you're not going to do? But we offer you that option. And again, you have the preview here. So you can make sure you've got everything correct. When you run preview, it'll show you what it's going to apply that retention to. So you can make sure that the right stuff is in there for you. And again, you can do retention based on the entire store or just on per individual items. So, 7 years from now, the email I sent today will have expired its retention period, but something that I sent 3 months from now shouldn't have that same retention date as the email I sent today. It will be retained until 7 years from when it was created. All right, so this is the more important part here. I just wanted to give you a little idea of some of the things that you can have our backup and archive as a service do for you automatically. This is where we get into discovery, because that's where we've been talking most about message journaling. So let's take a look into things here. So there are two approaches to doing this discovery. You get two kinds of searches you can do. The first is I can perform an ad hoc search. That lets me search for whatever data I'm looking for, and when I search for that data, it doesn't put any sort of hold on the data. It just leaves it as is, doesn't adjust retention for any of it. Or I can create a case. A case is basically a container where the results of a search will be stored, and then they will be retained and locked down. So if I add a particular search to a case, a hold will be automatically placed on every item that was returned in the search results. So let's look at an ad hoc search first. So over here on the right side, we have everything. As with the retention or tiering policies, I can set exactly which store I want to do. I can set my search to run across everything. So yeah, I could just search files. I could search the stuff I have in stores as well as my email. Right now, I'm going to restrict it to just email, but I can do that full cross-platform search. So let's look at, I'm looking for email that has a keyword. So one of the reasons why people do backup, the most important part of it is being to recover things. So let's search for any email that contains the word recovery. We don't need custodians. Look, you can add, you can get an idea here of just how flexible. You can have multiple search criteria. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for a particular sender, and I bet you our CEO Jeff would probably not mind if I was using him as an example. So we're going to look for anything that was sent by someone named Jeff, and we want to do it by last modified. Actually, we can do it. Let's not do last modified. Let's do last read. So we come down here. So last accessed. So I want to look at only things that were accessed that Jeff sent that contain the word recovery that somebody actually read during the year 2020. So I have to set my date that I'll only be keeping things after. So if I'm only looking at emails from just after December 31st, 2019, I should get everything. You can set your time zone you want to use for it. You can go down to the time, and we can even allow you to use down to the second as part of your search criteria. But in this case, since I want anything in 2020, this criteria should be sufficient for that. So let's see what happens when I actually run this search. And you can see here, if you look down in the lower right, we found 73 items that this search discovered. So I can check things, make sure that I'm finding the things I expected to in there, that there isn't anything that doesn't contain the word recovery. And I've got everything there. If I want to do something more with it, I can refine the search. I can add additional search criteria or change some of them to make sure I'm getting the search results. Again, the ad hoc search is a great way to make sure you've got your searches correct before you use the search to place a hold on anything. And if it's a search you know that you're going to want to save later, you might want to search again later, you can save that search. And let's go into search examples here. No, I don't want to copy that. Let's say, yeah, this is going to be my search for this as done for this demo. So now that search has been saved. So there are two different ways you can open a case. Now that I've created the search, I can add it to an existing case. But let's go back to our get started here. Let's go here and let's create a new case. Now let me show you this first. You can see here, if I go to cases, we have 3 existing cases in this environment already. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a new case. And we are going to, this will be our demo case. Now, there are different things you can do here. Right now, the suppress legal hold option is not chosen. If I choose it, the legal holds won't be put on anything that those search results miss. Now, most often when I'm doing a case, it is for some legal reason, so I want to make sure that that hold is placed. We give you the ability to do some enhanced cases. Those would be where you apply more policies and different conditions to them, but I'm going to keep it simple for this here. So I'm going to create that case. And you see it arrives here. We want to look at that case in detail. We've got a case name. We've got some other things going here. So now let's look back at our saved searches. Okay, so now that we have a case, we can put it in there. I can add this to my case. And what it does here is let me select the particular case. And so what it's telling me here is, hey, this will automatically place a hold on all the items that are in this search result, and all 73 of those items are going to be added into the case, that special container we've got set up for it. And no, that's not my search name. All right, this field is required. I'm gonna back up a second here. Dave demo search. Okay, let's try this again here. My search name is and the case I wanted to go to is the case that I've created for this demo. And now I'm going to add it there. So this will set up that separate case. And it will add all the 73 items into it. Now, the reason I put things into a case is because I'm going to want to export that information from the case to use later. So let me show you how export works. So I have a virtual machine set up in my environment that I'm going to run the export from because it's already got that. It's in the same cloud that this is, and so I'm not being charged any data egress costs in order to get this export done. So first I need to connect to this virtual machine. Okay, and you can see here, this is your standard Windows server. So we have something we call the HubStor export utility. This is going to allow me to do those exports and get that data out in the form I want it in. So this gives it the URL of my tenant in HubStor's environment and what email name it's stored under. Since it's only ever been used with that store, that information has been populated already. I want to go next. It's going to make me sign into my account, of course, because, oh, yes, Alt Tab within demo does not work. All right. All right, now we're back on schedule. I sign in, so now that I have that connection to the backup tenant in the cloud, now we can talk about what we want to do, what mode we want to export in. Hey, if I want to give a user a copy of their own email box, I can do that. In this case, we're using a discovery case, and I just realized that I'm using the word case to have two different meanings in the same sentence, but this was a result of discovery, so I want to do that. Again, we want to export from email, and now I can choose the particular case that goes here. And in this case, again, since it's email, the easiest way to serve it would be to create a PST file. And then I have to decide where I want to write that file. So I can set my destination path. Now I have a G drive here set aside to run a bunch of things. So I want to create something there. Before I create that export, I want to go to File Explorer. Let's take a look at what is in that store now. So you can see right now that's empty. So nothing has been exported there yet. So I want to export to the demo exports folder I just created. And I need to give it the PST file a name. So let's do a demo export.pst. So now when I hit OK, I can now run that export. And you can see it's just started now, so it's going through connecting to my cloud tenant. It's looking specifically at the storage we set up for email. It's running the search we created earlier for that case, so it's going to be capturing any email that was sent by Jeff that mentioned the word recovery in it that somebody actually read during 2020. And again, what we've exported matches the number of things we saw in our search. 73 items. If you look here, you can see that it took less than 30 seconds to do that export. And you can see here now, I've got that PST file showed up where it wasn't before. So we've got that created 1 minute ago. We've got that as an Outlook data file. Now, if I wanted to run a different export, because maybe I have a couple different saved searches for a specific case, it allows me to immediately go back in and run another export. In this case, we don't want to do that because we've got everything that we already wanted. All right, I've got a couple minutes extra time left, and I think I can still get to any questions you guys have. So there's just something really neat about HubStor, which was one of the reasons that I joined the company. Is we do a lot of cool stuff. So I want to look at my system. And again, this is going to start. Let's look at the storage metrics. Now, looking at storage is important because your monthly bill will be based on the amount of space you're using. So you can see here, in all of my content in my environment has the size, just short of 28 gigabytes. Well, the first thing we do before we write that data is we do deduplicate it, and then we also compress it. So I'm actually, instead of storing almost 28 gigabytes, I'm storing a little bit over 11 gigabytes. And that is what your price will be based on. That's a savings of nearly 17 gigabytes. So our interface can show you the size that things were originally, but what it's writing to the storage that you'll be paying for is that smaller size. I can look here at these charts. I can see how much is being used by each type of thing. Here, the VM storage is an extremely small sliver. So I can look at the storage history here. And now again, this is let's look at its original size. So this axis runs up to, almost 56 gigabytes. And if I look here, you can see here, it's very easy for me to pick the level I'm looking at as well as the specific date. So it looks like the highest it went was 46. So if I were going to be using local storage for this kind of archive, I would need to buy something that could hold, something higher than that from day one. But you can see here, my cost in storage went down, but my actual cost is going to be based on the smaller deduplicated and compressed data. So you see this axis only runs to 13 gigabytes, and its highest usage was 11.28 gigabytes. So for that month, I'll be paying for 11.28. My pricing will not be based on that original 28 gig. Now again, these gig numbers sound small, and yes, it's a very small environment that I'm working with here. There's only one guy in there, and he's me. We've got other demo environments set up for some of the other folks who are running them. So this will, this is just one of the cool things I wanted to show you. I can get back to home at any point in the interface. Let me hop back into our presentation here. I see that gentleman is still very happy about this presentation. So how does our journaling solution compare to some of the other ones out there? Well, we include that deep content indexing, supporting those very complicated and detailed search queries. A lot of other solutions will index only and allow searches only on keywords, and can't really do those multiple clauses like we were able to. One of the things HubStor does that is really impressive to me personally, any audio or video files, if someone sent those as attachments in email, those audio and video files would be automatically transcribed, and any of the words spoken within those files would be added to the index, so it could be so a search would now find that audio file or that video file. A lot of other solutions can recognize that it's an audio file or a video file, and they can search for it by file name or file type, but their search isn't going to tell you anything about the contents of the video. We run optical character recognition. This is something you may have heard referred to as OCR. So any image files that are saved, like any of those attachments, if I send images if there's text within any of those images, it scans in the text and adds the text to the search index as well. Not so much for many other solutions. We can provide that self-service search capability. And again, you can set up very strict role-based access controls for who is allowed to search what, who is allowed to export what, who is even allowed to access a search interface to begin with. A lot of other solutions out there, if you're going to want to do any one of those searches, if you want to apply that legal hold, if you want to export that data, you are going to need an IT administrator to do things. We journal across a wide range of data sources that you saw listed. We can do it from files, from Exchange servers. We can do it from Microsoft 365, including Microsoft Teams. And you may be using that for your messaging while you're using Outlook.com for your email. Other solutions will journal only across a few sources, or they support multiple sources, but they have a separate piece of software and separate user interfaces. And what I was able to show you was the ability to run a single search across all of my sources. Anything that's in my archive from any source I've pulled data from, I can do a single search from one unified management console that will get all of my sources, and you're just not seeing that capability on the majority of other solutions out there. If you're interested by what you've seen here and you want to kind of take it for a test drive yourself, you can actually download our virtual machine protection and start doing VM backups. When you do that, you'll activate a 30-day full-featured free trial. And that's something that's easy to set up and install for yourself. So if you want to get a look at things, especially more details on what you do for a VM backup, you can do that. Now I talked about dedicated instance. Am I going to want that isolated tenant? Am I going to want to get billed every month by invoice? Am I going to want to get some sort of subscription agreement? If you're not sure which would be more cost effective for you, reach out, contact us, and we can walk you through the questions you need to ask to help figure out which would be most cost effective for you. You will be receiving access, you'll be receiving a copy of this presentation, so you'll be able to click on those links once you have it, so don't scramble to write any URLs down. And if you have any other questions or you're not sure where to get started, you can just reach out to us, send an email to sales, or give us a call. And again, all that information is also going to be clickable and will be provided there, and the contact info is also on our website. So I didn't take a good look at questions as I was going. So I just am going to open up questions now. If you have any questions right now, please go, over on the right-hand side, you should see your GoToWebinar console. And under the questions section there, you'll find something that looks a lot like the chat, and you can submit the question through there. So I've got a couple questions about different compliances. I see one for 617A and somebody asking about the SEC 17A. And so yes, we can do that 17A. Capable. Most of that is going to be based on retention of data and making sure that data is immutable. Immutable means it cannot be changed. So I not only can't delete it, if a disgruntled employee or someone who was trying to pull some sort of stock scam wanted to go back in and change the size of their order, they can't do it. They can't write that data at all. It remains unchanged, and we can show proof to an audit log. If you ever get audited for it, we can show proof that no, it is exactly the same byte for byte as it was when it was ingested into our system. So yes, I only focused on a few of the particular regulations because there's so many of them out there, like just so many. And we weren't going to have time to do all of them. So I covered some of the main ones that would be relevant. Obviously, if you're in finances, you're going to be very interested in those SEC rules. Almost all of the compliance regulations involve data retention. So if that's what you need to do to comply, you can do that very flexibly with HubStor. And so we do support other things like Sarbanes-Oxley and a lot of other regulations. Okay, we've still got a little bit of time to ask any more questions you have one. Okay, I've got a question about data location, particularly within the European Union, but it's starting to, the idea is spreading to other parts of the world now. They have rules over what they call data sovereignty. And so I'm being asked about that. So what data sovereignty means is, for example, if I'm doing business in Germany with German customers, they want that data to remain within the borders of Germany. So that needs to be stored in a data center in Germany. We can do that. We can actually support every region that Microsoft Azure supports. So we can set somebody up to have a store in that location. We can still, back at the corporate office, run searches against that across the internet. So we can see things. So we can, for Microsoft 365, they have a feature they call Microsoft geolocation controls. So that's where I set policies for, hey, this information, which information gets stored where. If it's this type of information as it's created, make sure it's stored in this backup store in that location. So that way you can keep your backups in the same location as the original data and make sure that you're complying with any regulations you have about data sovereignty. Okay, I don't see any more questions right now. If you do discover you have questions later, by all means, reach out to us. We'll get someone who can answer them for you. So, as I mentioned before, I know everybody's time is valuable. I know 2020 is making all of us work harder than ever. So I really appreciate that you all took the time out of your day to come listen to me. And despite some of my difficulties in getting things started. So thank you very much for your time. Again, in addition to Content Accelerator, if you go to the handouts section and go to webinar, we have a data sheet about our message journaling that you can download. You can also find that on our website underneath our resources section. So again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.